Hello BookTube. Today on my 2023 library tour, I am continuing with my history wall. Today I'm doing this second shelf right here on this bookcase that my grandfather built almost 30 years ago. So let's get going. The first book on this shelf is yet another Alexander the Great biography. This is Alexander of Macedon 356 to 323 BC, a historical biography by Peter Green. This is a fantastic Alexander the Great biography. I really enjoy it. It's been a while since I've read it, though. Next is, if I can get it out, Streams of Gold, Rivers of Blood. The Rise and Fall of Byzantium, 955 AD to the First Crusade by Anthony Kaldellis. This is the history of the Byzantine Empire, and it's been a while since I've read it. I think I picked it up in 2020, and I really would like to revisit it and have another go at it. I remember not quite getting on with it the first time I read it, but hopefully a reread will improve things. Another book I would love to revisit, and not necessarily because I didn't quite get on with it the first time. I absolutely love this book. This was, oh dear. Let's move you out first. Okay, I need to rearrange this. Anyway, but a book I really love. It probably would be my second favorite book I read in 2020, and that is Maoism: A Global History by Julia Lovell. This is a history of the global influence of the thought of Mao Zedong, and it is an amazing book, absolutely amazing. I cannot wait to reread it. Next is a book that I actually did a Bell redemption of that was very successful, and that is Iran, A Modern History by Abbas Amanat. This is a history of Iran from the rise of the Safavids to the present Islamic Republic. The the introduction is nearly fatal, and that's largely what made me bail on it the first time I read it. But getting past the introduction, the book is amazing, absolutely amazing, particularly the coverage of the Safavids and Qajars. I really love those chapters, but yeah. Iran and Modern History is great. Next is a book that I have not read yet. Perhaps in no small part because it does not want to come out of the shelf. And that is Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin by Timothy Snyder. This is a World War II history that I've been meaning to get to for quite a while, and I really want to get to it at some point. So I'll try to make an effort to get to it sometime this year. Next is a history that I really enjoy, and that is The Kingdom of the Hittites by Trevor Bryce. I have a sweet tooth for the Hittites. The Hittites were an Anatolian people who lived, who were one of the great empires of the late Bronze Age. And I have a sweet tooth for them, and I would love to see a new history of them so I can read. But this is definitely pretty good too. Although it's been a while since I've read it. Another great work of history is Wild Sea, A History of the Southern Ocean by Joy McCann. I read this, I think, for the first time in 2020, and then I did reread it, and I loved it as much as I could reread. So this one is a fantastic history of the Southern Ocean. Oh, I definitely need to rearrange. these shelves. Anyway, so next is China's Cosmopolitan Empire, the Tang Dynasty by Mark Edward Lewis. This is a brief history of the Tang Dynasty. Um, I'm developing a bit of a sweet tooth for Chinese history, particularly dynastic history, and I would love to add a lot more to my collection. But this was really good. I really enjoyed it. Due for a reread. Next is another really interesting book, A Queer History of the United States by Michael Bronsky. I read this a few years ago and really enjoyed it. I thought this was fantastic. Next is a big work of history, Australia, A New History of the Great Southern Land by Frank Welsh. This is a big history of Australia that I read ages ago and really went into my collection. But I haven't reread it since I added it to my collection. But definitely overdue for a reread. Perhaps sometime in April for Aussie April, I might do a read of this. Although my April might be packed, so I don't know. Next is another great book, November 1918, The German Revolution by Robert Gerwarth. No, Gerwarth. This is a fantastic look at the end of World War I in Germany, primarily the revolutions that took down the Hohenzollern monarchy and the other German monarchies, and the what followed. This is a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. Next is a book that I think I still have unsettled opinions on. And that is Thebes, the Forgotten City of Ancient Greece by Paul Cartledge. So this is a history of Thebes. Thebes was one of the most important Greek city-states, particularly in regards to Greek myth. And the early parts of the book I really enjoyed. But once the history gets to the Peloponnesian War, Thebes gets a little bit lost. And then it's destroyed a few decades later by Alexander. So anyway, so it's a bit of a mixed book, I think. Next is a book that I'm not all that fond of, and that is A Brief History of the Caribbean from the Arawak and the Carib to the Present by Jan Rogozinski. This is a quick, by the numbers, look at the Caribbean, and it's rather boring. I am looking for a good history of the Caribbean, and unfortunately, I don't quite think I've found it yet, but this one definitely is not it. Because part of my goal with my history wall is to try to at least formulate a history of the world through the books on these shelves and these bookcases. While I also sort of develop specific interests like the late Bronze Age and Chinese history and other historical periods. But anyway, now this is a weird book, largely because it's the history of my alma mater, St. Edward's University, A Centennial History by William Dunn. So St. Edward's University is a university in Austin, Texas. It's on a little hill that overlooks the sort of the downtown Austin. And I went there, and I loved my time there. And when you're kind of like going for orientation and stuff, they give you, or at least my class, I don't know if it's typical or not, but they did sort of give a copy of this book to the incoming freshmen, although we weren't required to read it. So anyway, but yeah, so I've had this for 20 years now, and it's a treasured possession largely because it is a history of my alma mater. Next is a really great work of history, Sea People by Christina Thompson. This is The Puzzle of Polynesia. So this book looks at Polynesia and the Polynesians, and also the study and the questions about Polynesians. And it's a fantastic book. I read it for the BookTube Prize and loved it, and was one of my favorite books that I read for the BookTube Prize. Although I haven't really gone back to it, I really would like to. Next is History and Society by Noah Edward Fell. I don't really know much about this book. I really need to read it. This is one of the ones that I've had for a while in my collection, and I haven't gotten around to yet. I really should make a project of it. This is Culture in the Third Reich by Moritz Vollmer, translated by Jeremy Noakes and Leslie Sharp. So this is a work of German history. It looks at culture in the Third Reich, how the Nazis took over German culture and German society, and it is harrowing reading, very harrowing, but very engrossing as well. And finally, the last book on this shelf is a work of Japanese history, A Modern History of Japan from Tokugawa Times to the Present by Andrew Gordon. I read this ages ago and really wanted it in my collection. I also have a sweet tooth for Japanese history, and I would love to have more Japanese history. So I'm definitely on the lookout for more works of Japanese history. I probably really ought to get around to rereading this at some point. Although there are so many other books I really need to read that I haven't read yet. So anyway, BookTube, that was a shelf 2 of the History Wall. I will be back tomorrow to round out the third book, the third shelf on that bookcase. And then we will move on to the bookcase below it, because it's on top of one. But anyway, BookTube, I will hopefully be back later this evening, either with the discussion video I was wanting to do yesterday. Although, the more I think about it, the more I go over what I want to talk about in my head, the more depressing that subject is. So I don't know necessarily if I will do that. And if I don't, I might instead do a March TBR in case I go bail crazy with my March of the Mammoth books. Hopefully I won't, but you never know. So anyway, BookTube, we'll see what comes up later this evening. But until then, thank you. Have a great afternoon, and I will definitely see you tomorrow. So regardless of what happens this evening. So anyway, BookTube, until then, stay safe.